As Andrew mentioned, I grew up in Camden and in Lincolnville. I'm here thanks to PopTech's commitment to locally grown produce. And actually, I just have to describe, the last time I was on this stage was 15 years ago, and I was an extra in the high school production of As You Like It. So it's great to be back. For the last decade, I've mostly been focused on organizing people. But lately, I've been thinking a lot more about organizing information. And particularly, I've been thinking about the consequences of the race for algorithmic relevance. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a minute. But first, just a disclaimer. I'm not an expert. I've just been sort of looking at this for the last year. I'm kind of a curious observer. And like I used to do out in the woods behind where I lived, I've been kind of following this stream to see where it leads. And over the last year, I've talked to a lot of interesting people. I've talked to political scientists and psychologists. I've talked to engineers and internet experts. And I'm beginning to get a sense of kind of where all of this is headed. And it's a really exciting time in the organizing of information. But I also think actually there are some negatives that we should be thinking about. It may be that the internet doesn't quite connect us as much as we think. And in fact, if algorithmic relevance isn't constructed in the right way, if our information streams aren't constructed in the right way, we may find ourselves at a loss for some of the kind of creative thinking, the brilliant breakthroughs that we've been talking about at the conference. So first I want to talk about why there's such a fixation on relevance right now. And I picked this up from the chief economist of Google, who said that since the beginning of civilization until 2003, if you took every conversation people had, every thing that was written down, and you took all of that information and you put it on a computer, it would be about 5 exabytes. And an exabyte is basically, it's a billion gigabytes. So 5 exabytes is about 1.5 million iPods worth of data. So that's from the beginning of history to 2003. It's also the amount of information that we produced in the last 3 days. So this is a problem, and it's a problem that we all face in our day-to-day lives. We have this deluge of information. And so we turn to companies like Google and to Facebook and to Amazon and to Pandora to sort through it and give us the stuff that really matters, the stuff that matters to us. There's another reason that there's a big focus on relevance these days, which is that relevance is money. The more relevant your website is, the more people keep coming back. The more relevant the content is, the more people read. And of course, if you're able to serve very personally relevant content, you're also able to serve very personally relevant ads. And you can make a lot of money that way. And there's a third reason, which is that relevance feels good, right? It feels good to have people greet you by name. It feels good to have people, have the guy at the desk say, ah, yes, I know exactly what you like. Here it is for you. And so these environments feel really great. Now, it's worth noting, they don't have to be that way. I mean, you don't have to construct a website so that it gives you just the kind of good stuff in relevance. If you're a conspiracy theorist and you're searching for information about the conspiracy around 9/11, maybe the most relevant link to give you is the thing that actually, that Popular Mechanics article that disproves your theory. But that's not usually what you get, because these algorithms are actually built around giving you more of what you click. And so it's going to be more of what you expect, more of what you like. So I think the Facebook founder, Mark Zuckerberg, kind of summed up both the promise and the problems with relevance really well. And I'm not sure he did this fully self-awarely, but he said, a squirrel dying in front of your house may be more relevant to your interests right now than people dying in Africa. And this is sort of the problem. But Zuckerberg isn't the only one who is excited about this, about kind of finding ways to build software that figures out what's relevant to you and delivers it to you. So the vice president at Yahoo says the future of the web is personalization. Sheryl Sandberg at Facebook says in the next 3 to 5 years, it's going to be an anachronism to visit a website that isn't tailored to specific users' interests. YouTube is developing a product called Leanback, and Leanback essentially strings together YouTube videos so that you don't have to do the hard work of looking around for videos that might interest you. They're all just prepared for you, and you can lean back. And Eric Schmidt told the Wall Street Journal the other day that pretty soon it'll be very hard for people to watch something that has not, in some sense, been tailored for them. So there's this kind of, as a result of this, there's this race for personal data, for the information that you can build relevance off of. But what I want to argue today is that when we're talking about creativity, a perfectly engineered relevant environment poses some problems, and there are actually 3 of them. So the first one, well, so to figure this out, I did some reading about the creativity research. And it's incredibly boring, I have to say. It's very dry. It's not creative at all. And you get stuff like this, which is the definition, the sort of accepted definition of creativity, a product or response that's judged as creative to the extent blah, 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 blah. And basically what it says is what's creative is something that's new and useful that you can't solve with that you can't come up with through an algorithmic means, through an equation. So what's more interesting is what are the environments that produce creativity, and what are the what are the traits of people who are able to innovate? And one of the concepts that comes up again and again is this idea of wide categories. My favorite study about this involved writers at the Iowa Writers' Workshop. And you can just kind of read the incredulity in the research report as they're talking to these writers, and they're asking them to take objects and sort them into categories. And my favorite one was this one, where they gave the guy an apple, and they wrote, in response to the apple, he sorted only the wooden block with a nail in it, explaining that the apple represented health and vitality, or yin, and the wooden block represented a coffin with a nail in it, or death. So what I loved about this, so they found that these writers were much more likely to sort things in these sort of unusual categories than regular people. And it's a great experiment because it proves 2 things, something about creativity and also why writers are such a pain in the butt. Another great example comes from physics history. And this is Niels Bohr, who was a Nobel laureate physicist and who failed his high school physics exam. And the question that he failed on was a question about measuring the height of a building with a barometer. And Bohr somewhat cheekily responded that the easiest way to measure the height of a building with a barometer is to tie a string to it and lower it down the building and measure the string. So great creative thinking. His instructor was not impressed. But it's basically the same idea of wide categories. It's thinking of a barometer as object with mass rather than as instrument of measurement. So the problem is, let's think about how Netflix associates objects. Let's think about Netflix thinks about categorization. So Netflix is based on an algorithm that basically thinks about, if you like this, then you're going to like that. If you like this movie, then you like that one. And so the core of the Netflix algorithm is something called root mean squared error. And root mean squared error is basically a way of looking mathematically at what movies cluster together and what people cluster together. And it's very powerful. Netflix is able to figure out what movies that you will like with an accuracy of about a star, an eight-tenths of a star or so. And so they can see these patterns in the data. They can see that if you like The Wizard of Oz, then you're very likely to like, and this is true, Silence of the Lambs. But the problem with this is that that's not actually mostly how it works, and we all know this. Mostly, if you've seen one romantic comedy, then you're going to be recommended another romantic comedy. You're going to be recommended the things that are close. In addition, there's actually another problem with root mean squared error, which is that it's, as a mathematical concept, is not going to give you sort of risky propositions. So just not to get too mathy, but if you have a movie that has a 50% chance of you giving it a 5 or a 1, what Netflix's algorithm will say is, well, that averages out to a 3. And they'll never recommend it. Now, you might say, that's actually 50% is a great likelihood of having a 5-star movie. I almost never give movies 5 stars. And so it's worth the risk. But this is the difference between prediction, which is what Netflix is doing, and recommendation. And the point is that in this kind of algorithmic way of thinking, you're not going to get to those regional kind of concepts that Kevin was talking about on the first day. You're not going to get outside of this sort of very narrow, your local group in these information systems. So the second sort of interaction of relevance and creativity has to do with randomness. And people in this room are probably familiar to some degree with this research from Dean Simonton, which talks about the evolutionary theory of creativity. So Simonton got interested in a 1922 paper about innovation that was happening in the same place at the same time. This guy Ogburn came up with 160 examples of this happening. We've all heard of Ben Franklin and the key and that whole experiment, but we haven't heard of Francois d'Alibar, who a month earlier in France did the same exact experiment. And unfortunately, I'd show you a picture, but there are no pictures in Google Images. We know about the, some of the inventors, but we don't know the 5 or 6 others, the 5 people who all invented the electric engine around the same time. We know about Galileo, who discovered sunspots in 1611. But we don't know about the 4 other people who also discovered sunspots, also in 1611, without communicating with each other. And so the question is, why does this happen? Why do you have these, these spontaneous bursts of innovation? And what Simonton wondered was, maybe this has something to do with evolution. What if we think about this as an evolution as a process of blind variation, where ideas are sort of running around at a societal level, combining with each other, and being selected for. And that's how innovation happens. And so you would expect if you have a population of one idea and a population of other idea, and they're mixing, that they would pop up in lots of different places around the same time. And in fact, that's what we're seeing from the research. So the problem with the perfectly relevant environment is that it doesn't have that kind of randomness in it. It's lacking the sort of the UV rays that's going to create the mutation. Evolution really requires this kind of serendipity. And when you have a perfectly controlled, a perfectly constructed algorithmic environment that's showing you exactly what it calculates you're going to want to see, you're missing that. So the third thing about creativity and relevance is the problems with induction. And that's how all of these processes work, right? They look at your history and they say, well, if you've done this and this, then you're likely to do this. And the problem with induction actually has been on people's minds for about a couple hundred years. Because ever since David Hume noticed that you couldn't actually say that something that was induced was true. Just because it's happened before, you can't say that it's going to happen again with absolute certainty. And so this is a problem for science, because in science, it's the pursuit of truth, and yet the basic mechanism of saying, we observe this group of data, and therefore we can predict what the next thing is going to be, turns out to be a problem. And this is often known as the black swan problem. So you can't induce from the fact that all swans that you've observed are white, that all swans are white. You can just make a prediction. But we get to Karl Popper, who's a historian of science in the middle of the century. And Karl Popper says, well, so what are we going to do with this? Well, clearly, what we need to do in science is we need to think about falsifiability. We need to approach this as a process where we're trying to find the black swan. We're trying to find the thing that disproves our theory. And what's interesting about the systems that are used to personalize, that are used to create relevance these days, is that they don't have very much space for falsifiability. If they get a hunch that you are a romantic comedy fan, they're not going to try to kind of like, let's throw a curveball. Let's see if actually you've changed. You're a science fiction fan now. Let's try to broaden our idea of who you are, rather than sort of pushing you down into this very narrowly induced path. And so that's the third problem with relevance and creativity. So this isn't inevitable. This doesn't have to be the way it is. It's just an argument for thinking about it and for doing good curation. And this is a website that I would like to build sometime soon. I've reserved the URL, thingsyou'llhate.com. And this is, of course, all of the stuff that people who are very unlike you think is great. And this would be one way of kind of exposing yourself to different things. But the point is, as more and more of our information environment is curated through these algorithms that are trying to guess what's going to be relevant to us, we really need to pay attention, just like we paid attention to the newspaper editors, we need to pay attention to the new editors, the new systems of curation that are figuring out what we get to know and what we don't. Because after all, the system is invisible. You don't get to see on what basis Netflix is picking or choosing. You don't get to see on what basis Google decides that this is relevant for you and not that. And most importantly, you don't get to see what you're missing. You don't have a sense of what's left out of the picture, and that's a problem. So one of the best critics of this kind of sort of rationalistic inductive thinking doesn't come from the 21st century. He actually comes from the 19th century, and that's Fyodor Dostoevsky. And he looked at the kind of scientific positivism of the kind of late 1800s and was worried. And in Notes from Underground, he has this great passage where he has his character sort of ranting, grumbling. It would be great for a blog post, where he says, all human actions will then, of course, be tabulated according to these laws mathematically, like tables of logarithms up to 108,000, and entered into an index in which everything will be so clearly calculated and explained that there will be no more incidents or adventures in the world. And that phrase really stuck with me. No more incidents or adventures in the world. I think we have to work hard to prevent that. Because we need media systems that will make us uncomfortable, that will push us out of our comfort zones. I think that's what's great about pop tech. We need media systems that call our attention to the things we don't know, rather than patting us on the back and flattering us about how great it is, all of the things we do know, all of the opinions that we have. We need media systems that don't block us, that don't shield us from new areas of inquiry, from things that may concern us, from things that we may disagree with. Because as I learned growing up in Maine, the world is a really amazing and beautiful place, and it's worth exploring. Thank you.